In this video, we're going to observe how we can work with CSV files in Python, and I'm going to show you a few examples. Now, there are many use cases where you'll need to be able to analyze large CSV files that contain data on which you want to perform analytics. And to do this, you'll need to pass through the contents in an effective way. Now, a lot of people will resort to the pandas module in order to analyze CSV data right from the start. And I will cover an example of analyzing CSV data with pandas at the end of this video, but Python already comes pre-packaged with a module called CSV. So there's no need to download an external module like pandas to work with CSV files. So let's take a look at an example. Now, in this first example, I'm going to use a file that I've called hobby.csv, and this file is very simple in nature. It contains 3 columns, and the headers are name, age, and fav_hobby. We then have 4 rows of data showing an individual's name, their age, and their favourite hobby. Now, in an Excel file, this would look something like the following. But if you were to open its contents up in Notepad, you would see how simple the structure of a CSV file is. We can simply see that there are names separated by commas, just like the name CSV suggests, comma separated values. And we can see that each row of data is terminated by a new line, i.e. each record is on a separate line. And knowing this structure will allow us to pick apart the file seamlessly. So let's go ahead and analyze this CSV data in Python. First of all, I need to import the CSV module. And then to open up the CSV file, we need to put the keyword with, and then we can put open with a set of parentheses. In order to simply read the file, we can first of all put the file name. In our case, it's hobby.csv. I can then put a comma, and then we'll pass in the R argument, which stands for read only. Now, if I open up the documentation of the open function, you can see here that if I scroll down to character meaning, R stands for open for reading, i.e. read only, but we do have other options that we can use. If we wanted to write to this CSV file, we could use the W instead, which means that we would be opening this file for writing, truncating the file first. X would mean create a new file and open it for writing, and so on. Now, after we've called this open function, we are then going to alias this as file. And what that will mean is we can use the variable name file in the rest of our code to represent the opening of this CSV file. I can then put a colon. I will then create a variable called reader, and we'll set this equal to a call on the CSV module. I will then access a method called reader, and inside the reader parentheses, I'm going to pass in the variable file. This essentially creates a reader class, and we now want to pass through the contents of this file. And the way we do this is by using an iterator. So we can put for row in reader, then a colon. We can then simply print the row. Now, when I run this code cell, you will see that we print to the screen each row that's contained in the original hobby.csv file. The first list object is the list of headers. The second, third, fourth, and fifth lists are the actual rows in the dataset. And there we have it, a very simple way of being able to pull in the CSV data in Python. However, we can make working with this data a little easier. Now, seeing as we know how this CSV file is structured, and it's always a good idea to observe a CSV file before diving in and reading its contents, we can actually use Python to simplify our ways of working with this CSV data. So let me show you how this can be done. So firstly, we can create a constant called file_path, and we can set this equal to our CSV string hobby.csv, and this is the file that we are working with. Now, if you haven't saved the CSV file in the same path as the notebook, you can actually put the path to where the CSV file is saved. Now next, I'm going to create a class which will represent the CSV file. So I'm going to call this class hobby, and then I'm going to set a few constants. The first thing I'm going to put is has underscore headers, and I'm going to set this equal to true. Now the reason I'm doing this is to tell the system that the CSV file does have headers, and they will start at row 0. I'm then going to create constants which refer to the column locations in the CSV file. So I'll set one constant called name underscore col, and because I know this is the first column, I'm going to set it to equal 0. I'm going to set a constant called age underscore col, and I'm going to set this equal to 1. And finally, I'm going to create a constant called fav underscore hobby underscore col, and I'm going to set this equal to 2. Now we have these constants set, I'm now going to open up the CSV file. So in a very similar way to how we've just seen, we'll put the keyword with, and then we'll call upon the open function. And in parentheses, we're first of all going to provide the file that we want to open. So this is now going to be the constant file underscore path, because we've now stored the CSV file inside of a variable. And we'll once again put R as a string, which means that we're going to open this file in read-only format. We will then set an alias for this file as file. Just like we saw previously, we'll set reader to equal csv.reader and we'll pass in file. So this will construct a reader class object for us to be able to then pass each row respectively. I'm also going to create a variable called headers, and we'll set this to an empty list. And this is essentially where we'll end up storing our header information. So seeing as we know that this file has headers, we can put if hobby.has underscore headers and then put a colon, and we know that this is set to true in our hobby class, so the code after this colon will be executed. We can then put headers equals and then put next brackets reader. And what this will do is grab the first line in the CSV file and then start the iterable at the next row. Now, if there are no headers, in other words, if has underscore headers evaluated to false, well, then we just want to start reading in the data. So we can then put for row in reader. So for every row in that reader object, and then we can put a colon, we can now decide what we want to do for each row. So let's just say that we're only interested in rows which have data that spans across the whole amount of columns, i.e. the line isn't empty and its length is at least as long as the last column. So we could put if row, and this will just check to make sure that the line isn't empty, and the len of row is greater than hobby.fav underscore hobby underscore col. And this is just checking to see that the length of row is greater than 2, which it would be if it had 3 columns populated. Well, then we can put another colon, and then we can start setting some variable names which then store this data. So we can set a variable called name equal to a call on the variable row, which is holding each row one at a time as we iterate through the reader class object. And we know to access a value from a list, we put square brackets and then the index value that we're interested in. Now, seeing as we've set constants above, we can simply pass into these square brackets hobby.name underscore col. And seeing as name underscore col is set to 0, this will pick up the first item in the list and assign it to the variable name. We can do the same with a variable called age. So if I set the age variable to equal row and then in square brackets pass in hobby.age underscore col. And seeing as the default type is string when you read from a CSV file, we want the age to be an integer. So we can also then pass this into the built-in int function. Let's suppose now that I only want to see people who are between the ages of 20 and 30. So we can end with our final if statement that states if age is greater than or equal to 20 and age is less than or equal to 30, we can simply print out curly braces is curly braces years old. We can then use the format method and then pass in the variable name, and the second variable will be age. Now this may seem like a long way of analysing this file, But what we've been able to do here is pass through a CSV file and specifically target data that we want to analyze. In this instance, I've been able to pass a CSV data and filter out all the data where the ages of individuals are between 20 and 30. I then get a nicely formatted string, and I also get the respective name from the file. If I wanted to store the favourite hobby information, I could have done this also, but hopefully you're starting to see that by using the open function and then passing in the CSV file that we want to observe, by using the csv.reader method and then iterating through each row in that CSV file, we're able to perform analytics on a tremendous amount of data much more efficiently. In fact, Excel can only handle a certain amount of rows before the performance noticeably declines. If it goes beyond that 1 million row count, Excel will actually cut off data and your analysis won't be complete. So this is a much more efficient way of being able to observe data in a CSV file. In the next video, I'm going to show you how we can create CSV files from Python using lists and dictionaries, and then I'm going to touch upon the pandas library where we'll see how we can read in CSV files into objects known as data frames. So I'll see you in the next video.